Jim Kazanjian was born in Los Angeles, California, and currently lives and works in Portland, Oregon. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Kansas City Art Institute and his Master of Fine Arts at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. He is an established computer graphics artist in television and computer game production. He has been featured in publications, has exhibited his work in galleries across the US, Europe, Australia, and other places for almost a decade. His current body of work, from which my chosen images have been selected, is non-client based, meaning that the pieces were created for their own sake and not by commissions. Hi, I'm Zann Goff, one of your classmates, and I wanted to start off my discussion of Jim Kazanjian's work with what drew me to it, and why I decided to choose him as an artist from among the artists featured in the classroom's links. My first attraction was, of course, purely visual. The images on his site are complex, eliciting a nostalgia for their steampunk-like composites of machinery, architecture, and wild natural elements and settings. There's a nostalgia for sure, but there's also something of a melancholy, or a discomfort, or even a foreboding, impressing of a post-apocalyptic scene far in the future. They are haunting scenes that in themselves look nostalgically back towards visions of our own future that has not yet taken place. Images like this one, for example, called Grotto, show something of a hybrid of a castle and a factory, spewing black smoke from atop a rock of an island. The imagery is dark and haunting. Trees are bare and reminiscent of horror stories and Halloween tales. And in the center, a brightly lit door invites you to enter into and find comfort within, the darkness without. Or this image, titled Sphinx, shows a sphinx atop a cart that is composed of various scrap machinery. Cogs and wheels and gears combine the ancient past with scenes from an era of coal-burning technology. The images in these kinds of settings remind me of real-life art installations like you might expect to see out at Burning Man. Once I started reading about Kazanjian's history and process, I learned some interesting things about his methodology that really surprised me. What surprised me most of all is to learn that at no point does he handle a camera in producing his images. They are entirely and exclusively composed of other people's photographs, which he mines from the internet and archives in a collection of over 25,000 images. Using Photoshop, Kazanjian cuts and overlays dozens and dozens of elements that he selects for their relevance to his current project's vision. He creates photorealistic collages that elicit great emotion. In this image called Bungalow, we see a house with a big gap through the center. A windmill or propeller-like contraption is protruding through the front of the house, almost as if the house had opened up and divided to let the propeller out. It evokes something similar to a warplane or tank, with a gunner shooting out of a gap in a turret, a feeling further enhanced by the scene of debris and evident destruction. The post-apocalyptic destruction is even more literal in images like Implosion, with a building collapsing into a pile of rubble as a cloud of dust builds and billows from within. Before reading Kazanjian's own description of his work, I should explain that a palimpsest, which you're about to hear, is a document that has been erased and reused, leaving traces of the old writing or painting beneath the new. In Kazanjian's words, "My images are digitally manipulated composites, built from photographs I find online. The technique I use could be considered hypercollage. I cobble together pieces from photos that I find interesting, and I feed them into Photoshop. Through a palimpsest-like layering process of adding and subtracting, I gradually blend the various parts together. I am basically manipulating and assembling a disparate array of multiple photographic elements, sometimes more than 50, to produce a single homogenized image. I do not use a camera at any stage in the process. Conceptually, I had some challenges with this at first, accepting this type of work as photography. I noted that Kazanjian himself refers to his work as his images, and not as his photographs, which settled well with me. In reading more about how he works, I came to appreciate this type of work as simply one facet of the larger jewel that is visual imagery. His work is seamless, and it stands out in its own right, despite his lack of actively photographing anything himself. His work creates images and scenes that are photographic in nature, and as such I have come to accept them as photography. Kazanjian's images remind me of Taoist paintings such as this one, which are laid out to lead a viewer on a journey through a landscape that the artist has manufactured. The placement of natural and man-made structures and the play on light and shadow recreate the painter's motives in leading the viewer through ups and downs that are both physical and spatial, as well as conceptual and spiritual. In viewing Taoist paintings, the intention is that you meditate and let yourself take a journey through the painting, finding your way up both easy roads and down difficult climbs, with rests along the way where you can pause in reflection and ultimately reach some high point or high temple. Along the way are elements that allow you to circulate back to the beginning, such as waterfalls and bridges and alternate paths, that creates a continuously flowing cycle of travel throughout the painting. Kazanjian's work reminds me similarly of these visual, painterly journeys, both in the structural layout of his compositions and in the element of seeing yourself within them, entering doors, turning wheels, on your way through a journey that only your own mind can establish. In this image called Chateau, it perfectly exemplifies this concept, as do many of his other pieces. Kazanjian's work is very fantastical and requires imagination in assembling the components in the way that he does, such as in this image called Probe, with its combination of architecture and military aspects creating an uneasy and empirical feel. Unsurprisingly, artists whose work influenced him the most come from genres of art that are not his own. Rather than by photographers, Kazanjian is influenced by other visual artists. For example, M.C. Escher, familiar for sketches like this one, where every staircase leads to an impossibly circuitous new landing, and by literary artists such as H.P. Lovecraft and Algernon Blackwood. Kazanjian chose photography as his medium because he wanted to challenge the cultural misunderstanding that photography has sort of a built-in objectivity by its nature, that photography can be referenced as objective or purely documentary. He uses this psychological understanding of the public conception to his advantage. He sets up visual tension with his work, making it resonate and lure the viewer further inside. Kazanjian is fascinated with writers' abilities to transform commonplace situations into something sinister and foreboding. Like in the Taoist paintings, he tries to generate entry points for the viewer. He is interested in occupying a space where the mundane intersects the strange, and the familiar becomes alien. Kazanjian approaches construction of his pieces with an improvisational and random quality, letting each clip and element inform the image's potential direction. He lets it be an iterative and organic process, where often the end result is far from what he set out to create when he started. The pervasive theme of familiarity and decomposition and decay permeates all of the work that Kazanjian has worked on recently, and creates some really stunning visual imagery. To read more on your own, you can check out these websites. Some of them have links to some great, photographic magazines and journals.